Someone once told me to just feel your feelings, and I remember thinking, I don't even know what that means. I was reading about healing, consuming all the mental health content I could find, trying to understand why I felt so disconnected from myself. And everywhere I turned, the advice was the same. You need to feel your feelings to heal. Great, fantastic advice, except I spent my entire life not feeling my feelings. And I've gotten really good at pushing them down, staying busy, distracting myself, intellectualizing everything. And now everyone's telling me I need to do the one thing I've avoided for decades. I remember sitting with that advice, feeling completely lost, like, okay, but how? What does this actually mean? What do I do? Nobody was explaining the how. It was just this vague instruction repeated everywhere. Feel your feelings, as if I could just flip a switch. If you spent your whole life avoiding emotions, that advice is useless. It's like telling someone who's never went swimming before to just jump in the deep end. They'll drown, or at least they'll think they will, which is enough to keep them on dry land. So here's what I wish someone had told me back then. Feeling your feelings is a skill. And like any skill, you can learn it. You weren't taught it. Most of us weren't, but you can learn it now. Welcome back to A Lot to Grow Through. I'm Artist. This is where we grow through it, not just go through it. And today we're talking about why feeling your feelings is so hard and what to actually do when you have no idea where to start. Because the truth is, most of us weren't taught how to feel our feelings. We were taught how to push them down, ignore them, or perform them. We learned that emotions were inconvenient, too much, and dangerous. And then we became adults carrying years, sometimes decades, of unfelt emotions. And we wonder why we feel anxious all the time, or numb, or like we're going to explode. This episode is about unlearning all of that, about understanding why emotional avoidance happens, what it costs us, and how to actually start feeling without falling apart. So let's get into it. Let's start at the beginning. Why is feeling our feelings so hard? Because most of us learned early on that our emotions were too much, too inconvenient, or too threatening. Think about it. Children are naturally emotional. They cry when they're sad, they scream when they're angry, they laugh when they're delighted, sulk when they're disappointed. They're not performing emotions, they're experiencing them fully in real time with their whole bodies. But then comes socialization, and that's where things start to break down. Here are some of the messages many of us received, either explicitly or implicitly. Stop crying, or I'll give you something to cry about. You're too sensitive. Calm down. You're being dramatic. Big kids don't cry. Don't be angry, especially if you're a girl. Girls are taught that anger is unladylike, unacceptable, mean. Be nice, which often translates to suppress your real feelings and perform pleasantness. You're overreacting. It's not that bad. Sometimes the messages were even more subtle. Maybe your parents weren't emotionally available, so you learned, my feelings are too much for them. I need to handle this alone. Maybe expressing emotion led to punishment, abandonment, or more chaos in your household. So you learned it's safer to feel nothing than to feel too much. Maybe you grew up in a family where emotions weren't talked about at all, where everyone just kept moving. So you learned emotions don't matter, just push through. This is called emotional invalidation. When your emotional experience is consistently dismissed, denied, minimized, or punished. And here's what happens when you experience chronic emotional invalidation. You internalize it. You start doing it to yourself. You don't just learn to suppress your emotions around others. You learn to suppress them from yourself. You learn that your emotions are wrong, inconvenient, shameful, or dangerous. And this is how we end up as adults who can't name what we're feeling. We go numb when emotions arise. Stay busy constantly to avoid feeling anything. Only access emotions through explosive outbursts because we've been holding them down for so long. Intellectualize everything instead of feeling it. And feel ashamed for having emotions at all. And if you're sitting here thinking, yeah, that's me, I need you to know this isn't your fault. You didn't choose to develop these patterns. You adapted to survive your environment. Your nervous system did what it needed to do to keep you safe. And the thing is, what protected you then is probably limiting you now. And that's what we're here to work on. So what happens when you spend years, decades even, avoiding your feelings? What's the actual cost? Because it's not nothing. It's a real price we pay for emotional suppression. Let me break it down. 1, physical consequences. Your body keeps the score. Suppressed emotions don't just disappear, they get stored in your body. Ever notice how when you're anxious, your shoulders creep up towards your ears? How when you're stressed, your jaw clenches? How when you're sad but not letting yourself cry, you get a headache? Your body is holding what you won't feel. And over time, chronic emotional suppression can manifest as chronic muscle tension, headaches and migraines, digestive issues. Your gut is directly connected to your emotional state. Fatigue, suppressing emotions takes enormous energy. Chronic pain with no clear medical cause, and weakened immune system. Your body isn't designed to carry unfelt emotions indefinitely. It will find ways to tell you something's wrong. 2, relational consequences. You can't connect if you can't feel. If you can't feel your own feelings, you can't be emotionally present with others. You struggle with intimacy. You have surface level relationships. You can listen to people's problems, offer solutions, show up logistically, but you can't connect emotionally because true connection requires vulnerability. It requires being able to say, I feel scared, or I feel hurt, or I feel so much love for you, it's overwhelming. And if you spent your life suppressing emotions, that kind of vulnerability feels impossible, dangerous even. So your relationships stay at arm's length. People might say you're hard to read or emotional and unavailable, and they're not wrong. You are unavailable because you're not available to yourself. Number 3, mental health consequences. Suppression breeds anxiety and depression. Here's something most people don't realize. Anxiety and depression often stem from suppressed emotions. Anxiety is frequently unfelt fear that's looking for somewhere to land. When you don't process fear directly, it becomes generalized anxiety. This constant low-level dread that follows you everywhere. Depression is often an unfelt grief or anger. When you can't let yourself grieve losses or express anger appropriately, those emotions turn inward. They become heaviness, numbness, exhaustion. I'm not saying all anxiety and depression come from suppressed emotions. There are genetic, biological, and environmental factors too, but emotional avoidance is a major contributor that often goes unaddressed. Number 4, decision-making consequences. You lose your internal compass. Emotions contain information. They're part of your internal guidance system. Fear tells you this might not be safe, proceed with caution. Anger tells you a boundary has been crossed, something needs to change. Sadness tells you I've lost something that mattered, I need time to grieve. Joy tells you this aligns with my values. More of this. When you can't access your emotions, you lose access to this information. You make decisions based purely on logic or what you think you should do or what other people want, but not what you actually need or want. You end up in jobs that look good on paper but make you miserable, relationships that seem right but don't feel right, and life that's functional but empty. 5, authenticity consequences. You lose yourself. If you don't know what you feel, you don't know who you are. So you perform, you people please, you mirror others trying to figure out what they want so you can be that. But underneath all that performance, you have no idea what you actually want. This is the deepest cause because when you disconnect from your emotions, you disconnect from yourself. And listen, I know this is heavy. If you need to pause here, take a breath. This isn't meant to overwhelm you. It's meant to help you understand why this work matters. Why feeling your feelings isn't some fluffy self-help concept, but an essential part of being a whole integrated person. The cost of emotional avoidance is high, and at some point, avoiding your feelings becomes more painful than feeling them. That's the true turning point. And if you're here listening to this, you might already be at that turning point. Let me tell you about my turning point. The moment I realized something was fundamentally wrong, my grandmother died, and I felt nothing. Before she passed, I had shut off my emotions for 4 years. Every time something would get my emotions going, I would push it down. So you can imagine hearing the news of her passing and feeling absolutely nothing. And that terrified me. I went out into my grandparents' backyard, looked into the sky, and just asked God to let me feel something. And that's when all the emotions hit me at once and I lost it. Because it wasn't that I didn't care. It wasn't that I didn't love her. It was that I had become so good at shutting off my emotions, so practiced and not feeling, that when something happened that should have broken through, nothing came. I had shut myself down so thoroughly that I couldn't access grief even when I wanted to. That's when I knew, that's when I realized I can't keep living like this. Because if I couldn't feel sadness when my grandmother died, what else was I missing? What other moments was I sleepwalking through? What was the point of being alive if I couldn't actually feel my life? So I started doing the work. I started paying attention to my body in ways I never had before. I started trying to identify what I was actually feeling instead of just defaulting to I'm fine. Not perfectly, not all at once, but I started. And I'm telling you this because I want you to know I get it. I know what it's like to realize you've been emotionally offline for so long that you don't even know how to turn it back on. I know the fear that maybe you've been numb for too long, that Maybe you've lost the ability to feel altogether, but that's not true. You haven't lost it and it's still there. You just have to learn or relearn how to access it. And it's possible, it's hard, and it's uncomfortable. And some days you'll wonder if it's worth it, but it is. Because on the other side of this work, you actually get to be present for your life. The sad parts and the beautiful parts, all of it. So if you're scared right now, that makes sense. This is scary, but you don't have to do it all at once. You're going to break it down into manageable steps. Okay, let's talk about a reframe that fundamentally changed how I approach emotions. Emotions aren't problems to solve. They're information to receive. We've been taught through socialization, through media, through cultural narratives to view emotions as inconvenient, irrational, or dangerous, something to control, manage, or eliminate. But emotions are actually high functional. They evolved for a reason. They're your internal guidance system designed to help you navigate your environment and relationships. Think of emotions like the dashboard lights in your car. When the check engine light comes on, you don't ignore it and keep driving. Well, maybe you do, but you shouldn't. You don't get angry at the light for existing. You take it as information. Something needs attention. Emotion works the same way. They're signals, data, messengers. Let me break down what some common emotions are actually telling you. Anger. A boundary has been crossed. Something feels unjust, threatening, or wrong. You need to protect yourself, advocate for yourself, or address an injustice. Anger is mobilizing energy. It's your system saying this is not okay. Sadness. You've lost something that mattered. A person, a relationship, a version of yourself, an opportunity, a dream. You need time and space to grieve and process that loss. Sadness slows you down so you can integrate what happened. Fear. Your system perceives a threat, real or imagined. You need to access whether the threat is actual and decide how to respond. Fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. Fear is protective. It's saying pay attention, be careful. Shame. You believe you violate a value or expectation, either yours or someone else's. Shame tells you to examine. Is this belief accurate? Am I actually violating my values, or have I internalized someone else's shame and made it mine? Joy. Something aligns deeply with your values, your needs, your authentic self. You're experiencing connection, pleasure, meaning, or delight. Joy says more of this. This is what matters. Guilt. You've done something that conflicts with your own values. Unlike shame, which says I am bad, guilt says I did something bad. Guilt is actually productive. It tells you that you might need to make amends, apologize, or change your behavior moving forward. Anxiety. Often anxiety is fear that doesn't have a clear object. It's your nervous system on high alert, scanning for threats. Sometimes it's pointing to something real you need to address. Sometimes it's a sign that your nervous system is dysregulated and needs calming. Now here's what's key. You don't have to act on every emotion, but you do need to acknowledge it. Feeling angry doesn't mean you lash out. Feeling sad doesn't mean you collapse. Feeling fear doesn't mean the threat is real. But when you suppress emotions, you lose access to its information. You're flying blind. When you allow yourself to feel, you can ask, what is this emotion telling me? What do I need right now? What boundaries need to be set? What loss needs to be grieved? What value am I honoring or violating? Is this fear based on present reality or past experience? Emotions become useful. They become partners in your healing and growth. Here's an analogy. Think of emotions like a smoke alarm. If your smoke alarm goes off, you don't rip it off the wall and throw it away, even though it's tempting. You investigate. Is there actually a fire? Is something burning? Or is it just steam from the shower? Emotions are your smoke alarm. Don't ignore them. Don't punish them. Listen to them. Then decide what actions, if any, is needed. I know some of you were thinking, but what if my emotions are lying to me? What if I'm feeling things that aren't rational? Valid question. We'll get into that. But first, you have to be able to feel the emotion in the first place. You can't reality test an emotion you're suppressing. Okay, I know what some of you are probably thinking right now. I can feel the resistance. If I let myself feel, I'll fall apart. I'll be overwhelmed. I'll start crying and never stop. I won't be able to function. I'll drown in my emotions. That's a real fear, especially if you spent years keeping emotions at bay. It can feel like you're holding back a flood. And if you open that gate, even a crack, everything will come rushing out and sweep you away. So let's talk about the difference between feeling your feelings and drowning in them, because they're not the same thing. There's a concept I came across called the window of tolerance. It's one of the most useful frameworks I ever learned about. Your window of tolerance is the zone where you can experience emotions and still think clearly. Inside this window, you're regulated. You can feel sadness without collapsing. You can feel anger without exploding. You can feel fear without panicking. Outside the window, hypoarousal, you're flooded, overwhelmed. Your heart is racing. Your thoughts are chaotic. You might be panicking or feeling rage. Emotions feel completely out of your control. This is dysregulation. Outside the window, hypoarousal, you're numb, shut down, disconnected. Can't feel anything at all. This is also dysregulation. Your system has gone offline to protect you from overwhelm. Inside the window, you can feel the emotion, name it, be with it, and still maintain your sense of self. You're present, you're regulated. Now here's what's important. Your window of tolerance isn't fixed. It can be expanded. If you grew up in chaos or trauma, your window is probably pretty narrow. It doesn't take much to push you outside it, either into overwhelm or shutdown. But with practice, with support, with internal work, you can gradually widen that window. You can build your capacity to hold your emotion without getting dysregulated. That's what we're working toward. Not drowning, not shutting down, expanding your capacity to feel without being hijacked by the feelings. So what does drowning look like versus feeling? Drowning in emotions looks like complete overwhelm, can't think clearly. Emotions feel endless, unbearable, like they'll never stop. You're fully dysregulated, hyperventilating, can't calm down, spiraling. No sense of yourself as separate from your emotions. You are the sadness, the rage, the fear, and loss of time, space, groundedness. Feeling emotions looks like you notice the emotion. I'm feeling sad right now. You allow it to be present without fighting it. You maintain some awareness that you are experiencing the emotions. You're not the emotion yourself. You can still access your rational mind enough to use grounding techniques if you need it, and you can regulate yourself back to baseline when the waves passes. The key difference is you're with the emotion, not lost in it. You're not surfing the wave, not being dragged under. And here's a practical technique that helps. Titration means dosing your exposure to emotions in small, manageable amounts. It's a term borrowed from chemistry, adding something drop by drop rather than pouring it in all at once. So instead of, I'm going to feel all my grief from my childhood trauma right now in this moment, which will be absolutely overwhelming to you. Try, I'm going to let myself feel sad about this specific thing for 5 minutes. Then I'm going to do something grounding and come back to baseline. You're building your capacity gradually, like building muscle. You don't start by trying to lift 200 pounds. You start with 10, then 15, 20. Over time, you get stronger. Same with emotions. You can start small. You practice staying present with mild emotions. You build your window of tolerance. And eventually, you can hold bigger, harder feelings without getting swept away. And look, even if you've been avoiding emotions for years, this is going to feel scary at first. And that's okay. Scared is normal. We're not asking you to dive deep in the deep end. We're starting in the shallow end, one toe at a time. All right, enough theory. Let's get practical. How do you actually do this? How do you start feeling when you've spent years, maybe decades, not feeling? I'm going to give you a 5-step framework. These aren't complicated, but they do require practice and patience and a willingness to be uncomfortable. Step 1, notice that you're feeling something. This sounds basic, but for many people, this is the hardest part. If you've been suppressing emotions for a long time, you might not even register when an emotion is present. You train yourself to disconnect so automatically that you don't notice the signal. So the first step is just notice. And the easiest way to notice emotions, start with your body, because emotions aren't just thoughts. They're physical sensations. Your body knows you're feeling something before your mind does. So start paying attention to physical cues. Tightness in your chest, often anxiety or sadness trying to surface. Knot in your stomach, often fear or dread. Tension in your shoulders or jaw, it's often anger or stress. Heaviness in your limbs, it's often depression or grief. Restlessness, can't sit still, often anxiety or unprocessed energy. Numbness, feeling disconnected, often overwhelm or shutdown. When you notice a physical sensation, pause. Get curious. Ask yourself, what might this be about? Is there an emotion here? You don't have to have the answer immediately. Just notice, just wonder. Now, I do full emotion scans throughout the day, checking in with how my body is reacting to what's happening around me. I'll pause and just examine, where am I holding tension? What's happening in my chest? Is my jaw clenched? Are my shoulders up by my ears? What does my stomach feel like? It's not scheduled or structured. It happens when I notice I'm starting to feel off, or when something triggers me, or sometimes just randomly throughout the day when I remember to check in. This practice, just scanning my body for physical cues, has been one of the most useful tools I've learned. Because I used to have no warning system. I'd go from I'm fine to completely overwhelmed with no awareness of what was building. Now I can catch it earlier. I notice the tight chest before it becomes a panic attack. I notice tension before it becomes a headache. And I notice the heaviness before it becomes complete shutdown. Now, it's not perfect, and I still miss signs sometimes, but it's so much better than living completely disconnected from my body like I used to. Here's what this looks like in practice. You're scrolling through your phone. Suddenly you notice your chest feels tight. Instead of ignoring it and keep scrolling, you pause. You put the phone down. Take a breath, and you check in. What's going on? Am I anxious about something? Sad, stressed? You might not have an answer right now, and that's okay. Just noticing is step one. Now, a common mistake to avoid is don't judge yourself for having this sensation. Don't think, why am I anxious right now? I have no reason to be anxious. Just notice without judgment. The judgment shuts the process down before it can even start. Once you've noticed that something's happening in your body, the next step is try to name it. And I want you to emphasize, you don't have to be right. You just have to try. Start with broad categories. I think I'm feeling anxious or maybe sad. I'm not really sure. Naming the emotion, even tentatively, does something powerful. It creates a little bit of distance between you and the feeling. It reminds you that you are experiencing the emotion. You are not the emotion itself. From my psychology studies, I learned about this concept called affect labeling, putting words to your emotional experience. Simply naming an emotion actually reduces its intensity. When you label it, your prefrontal cortex, the thinking part of your brain, comes online and it helps regulate the limbic system, the emotional part. In other words, naming your emotions literally calms your nervous system. Here's how to build your emotional vocabulary. If you struggle with this, if fine and bad are the only two words in your emotional vocabulary, get yourself a feelings wheel. Google feelings wheel, print one out, keep it somewhere visible on your phone, will work as well. A feelings wheel start with broad categories in the center: angry, sad, happy, surprised, afraid, disgusted, and then branches out into more specific emotions. So instead of just sad, you might identify disappointed, lonely, hurt, hopeless, grieving, vulnerable. The more specific you can get, the more useful the information. Because I feel bad doesn't tell you much. But if I feel disappointed and a little betrayed, it tells you exactly what's going on and points you toward what you might need to address. Now, I don't use a feelings wheel. I categorize emotions in my head now based on what I've learned through study and experience. But that skill didn't come naturally. I had to actively learn emotional vocabulary. I studied the different categories of emotions, learned the nuances between similar feelings, practiced distinguishing between anger. But that skill didn't come naturally. I had to actively learn emotional vocabulary. I studied the different categories of emotions, learned the nuances between similar feelings, and practiced distinguishing between anxiety and fear, between sadness and grief, between anger and frustration. It was like learning a new language. At first, I had to think really deliberately, okay, what am I actually feeling? Not just bad, but what specific kind of bad? Over time, it became more automatic. Now I can usually name what I'm feeling pretty quickly. But it took intentional learning. Your brain can't name what it doesn't have words for. So if you're starting from fine and stress, you need to build that vocabulary first. The feelings wheel is a great tool for that. And here's what this looks like in practice. You notice tightness in your chest. Step one. Now you ask, what emotion is this? You scan your feelings wheel. You land on anxious. Then you get more specific. Actually, I think I'm worried. I'm worried about that conversation I have to have tomorrow. Boom. You've named it. And already it feels a little more manageable. A common mistake to avoid is don't overthink it. If you spend 10 minutes trying to find the perfect word, you've moved out of feeling and into analyzing. Just pick a word, any word, and move forward. You can always refine it later. Step 3, allowing the emotions to be there. Now, this is the step where most people get stuck because everything in you wants to push the emotion away. Fix it, distract yourself from it, numb it, make it go away. But the whole point of this process is to not do that. Instead, you're going to practice something radical, allowing the emotion to exist, not forever, not drowning in it, just for a few minutes. Try saying out loud if you're alone or silently if you're in public, okay, sadness is here. I'm going to let it be here for a few minutes. And that's it. You're not trying to make it go away. You're not trying to understand it yet. You're just acknowledging this feeling is present and I'm going to make space for it. Here's what's wild. When you stop fighting the emotion, it often passes much faster than when you're trying to suppress it. Emotions are like waves. They rise, they peak, they fall. The whole cycle usually takes about 90 seconds if you don't feed into it with the story. But when you suppress an emotion, you're essentially pushing the wave back down, and it just keeps building pressure. Eventually, it's going to come out, usually sideways at an inconvenient time and in a way you can't control. When you allow it, you let the wave crest and pass naturally. And why is this so hard? For many of us, feeling an emotion feels dangerous. It feels like if we let it in, we'll never get it out. We'll be consumed. But I want you to know you can handle your emotions. You survive 100% of your hard days so far. You're more resilient than you think. And you're not doing this alone. If it gets too intense, you have tools. You can ground yourself. You can reach out to someone. You can regulate. But you have to at least try to be with the feelings first. When I'm allowing an emotion to be there, I use self-talk to ground myself and stay present. I'll say things to myself like, it's okay. You can feel this. You're safe. This feeling won't last forever. Just let it be here. Understand what's happening, then learn to regulate. It's not about some specific hand placement or ritual. It's about talking myself through it. Reminding myself that I'm not in danger just because I'm feeling something uncomfortable. Sometimes I'm literally having to coach myself back to reality. You're feeling sad, and that's what it is. It's just sadness. You felt this before and survived. You can feel it again. I learned this through trial and error, trying different ways to stay regulated when emotions came up. Some things didn't work for me at all, but this self-talk approach stuck. It's like I'm parenting myself through the hard moments. The part of me that's scared to feel gets reassurance from the part of me that knows it's going to be okay, and it genuinely helps. The internal dialogue, calm, steady, compassionate, makes the emotion feel less threatening. It reminds me that I'm not going to drown in this feeling. I'm just experiencing it. And here's what it looks like in practice. You've named the emotion. I'm feeling sad. Now, instead of immediately reaching for your phone, turning on the TV, or diving into work, you sit with it. You let yourself feel sad for 3 minutes. You might cry. You might just sit there, but you're not running. You're present. And a common mistake to avoid is don't try to logic your way out of the emotion. Don't tell yourself, I shouldn't feel this way. I have no reason to be sad. That's invalidation. Just feel it. You can explore the why later in step 4. In step 4, get curious if you can. Once you've allowed the emotions to be there for a few minutes and you're not overwhelmed, you can move into curiosity. This step is optional, especially when you're first starting out. If you're barely holding it together, just feeling the emotions, you don't need to analyze it yet. That can come later. But if you have the capacity, getting curious about your emotion gives you incredibly valuable information. Ask yourself, what is this emotion about? Not in a judgment way, just curious. But what triggered it? Was it something someone said? A situation you're in? A memory got activated? Smell, song, a place? What is it trying to tell me? Remember, emotions are information. What's the message here? What does this emotion want you to know? What do I need right now? This is the most important question. If you're sad, maybe you need to grieve. If you're angry, maybe you need to set a boundary. If you're scared, maybe you need reassurance or support. You don't have to act on every emotion, but you do need to listen to it. I don't journal regularly. It's actually pretty rare for me. But when I do, it can be really revealing. I've had experiences where I'll start writing about being frustrated with work, and by the third sentence, I've realized I'm actually hurt because a friend hasn't reached out to me in weeks, or I think I'm anxious about a deadline, but the journaling reveals I'm actually scared about something completely different. The act of externalizing the emotion, getting it out of my head and onto paper, can help me see what's really going on underneath. Sometimes the emotions hide. Sometimes what you think you're really feeling isn't actually what you're feeling. But I want to be honest. I don't use journaling as my main tool. For me, getting curious usually happens through internal dialogue. just asking myself those questions and sitting with the answers. Some people need to write it out. I usually don't. The point isn't that you have to journal. The point is finding some way to get curious about your emotions instead of just reacting to them, whether that's writing, talking to someone, or just sitting with the questions internally. Whatever helps you actually explore what's happening. And here's what it looks like in practice. You've been sitting with sadness for a few minutes. Now you ask, what is it about? And you realize, I'm sad because I miss my friend. We used to talk all the time, and now we barely connect. I think I need to reach out. Boom, you have clarity. And the next step, if you want to take it, and a common mistake to avoid is don't spiral into rumination. If you find yourself going in circles, replaying the same thoughts over and over, you've moved out of curiosity and into rumination. That's not helpful. If that happens, gently redirect. Okay, I've explored this enough for now. Let's ground and move on. Step 5, get support. Here's the truth. If you're new to feeling your feelings, doing it alone is really hard. Emotions are meant to be co-regulated, meaning we're designed to process big feelings in the presence of safe others who can help us stay regulated. So if you're working on this, please get support. Here are your options. A therapist, especially one trained in trauma, somatic work, or emotion-focused therapy. From everything I've learned in research, having a trained professional guide this process makes a massive difference. They can help you navigate the hard stuff safely. A trusted friend, someone who can just be with you without trying to fix you. And support system. Knowing you're not alone in this work is powerful. Co-regulation, feeling your feelings in the presence of someone who's regulated, is often easier and safer than trying to do it alone, especially at first. And if you're dealing with big, old, complex emotions, trauma stuff, I really encourage you to work with a professional. This isn't something to white knuckle alone. I know therapy isn't accessible to everyone financially. If that's the situation, look for sliding scale therapists, community mental health centers, support groups, many are free, or crisis lines when you need someone. You don't have to do this completely alone. So let's bring this home. Feeling your feelings isn't weakness. It's not self-indulgence. It's not being dramatic. It's one of the bravest things you can do because it means being present with discomfort. It means not numbing, not distracting, not performing. It means being with yourself fully, even when yourself is hurting or scared or angry. Most of us learn to suppress our emotions because it wasn't safe to feel them. And I want to be really clear about that. If you learn to suppress your emotions, it's because you needed to keep you safe. It helped you survive. But now as an adult, you have more capacity, more resources, more choice. If you don't have to keep living in emotional lockdown, through unintentional practice, through research, experimentation, trial and error, you can learn to feel without drowning. You can expand your window of tolerance. You can receive the information your emotions are offering. It won't happen overnight. Feelings you've been avoiding for years don't just open up gently. There will be messy days. Days where you cry more than you expected. Days where anger surprises you. Days when you feel like you're doing it wrong. And that's all part of it. That's the work. But every time you allow yourself to feel, even for just a few minutes, you're building that capacity. You're telling your nervous system, we can handle this. We don't have to run anymore. And slowly, gradually, life starts to come back into color. If you take nothing else from this episode, take this. You are allowed to feel your feelings. You're allowed to take up space with your emotions. You're allowed to cry, to be angry, to grieve. Your feelings are valid and they matter. And you're not doing this alone. We're all figuring this out together. If this episode resonated, I want to hear from you. Submit your questions, stories, and reflections in written form or as a voice message by emailing letters@alottogrowthrough.com. I'll read and listen to every single one. Visit the podcast website at alottogrowthrough.com. And if you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, share, and leave a rating. This podcast is available wherever you listen to podcasts. And always remember, healing isn't linear, and you're doing better than you think. I'll see you next week.